I'm really excited to reconnect with Colin. We met in 2016 at Fuller Field School in Kansas with Gail Fuller and Lynette Miller. And we were the two speakers that year, or although I'm trying to remember if Chris Nichols was also one of the speakers with us, or if that was the year after.
Yep.
She was. Okay, so
Yeah,
that we had three of us. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's a wonderful, if you have never been to the Fuller Field School, it's kind of an amazing thing because everybody gets lots of time to talk. So we usually have 2 or 3 days of just 2 or 3 speakers, and then some outdoor field activities and smaller kind of mini workshops outside, and lots of amazing food. So that's where we met, and I was very new in this game. And so, Colin, your story was one of the first sort of big, long stories that I heard, other than what I was hearing on the road while I was traveling with the Soil Carbon Coalition. And I was very taken with it, with the and I've told it many, many times since then, my short version of it, of just how many different things you can do at once in one piece of land, and how brilliant that was to be able to make that work. And in many ways, it reminds me of the way that nature grows food, where there are all kinds of things going on at once. And I've often thought of that when I am thinking about how to really create abundance, not just for the human people who are on the land, but for everything that is moving through there. So I'm excited to hear what's happened since I last saw you. I'm hoping that we'll follow this up with a more of a conversation that we'll do on my Wisdom Underground Substack. But I thought it'd be good for me to see what you've been doing by having you present something first. And that'll give me a chance to read your new book also, Custodians of the Grassland, which I hope we'll hear a bit about as well. So welcome, Colin, and welcome everyone. And we will, just a couple little housekeeping things. If you, at the end, what we'll do is everybody will put their questions in the chat. And so we'll get all the questions out there. If you have a clarifying question that you're really not understanding as we go along, some terminology that's being used or something, feel free to chat directly with me. I appreciate if you don't use the chat just for random conversations during this, because as someone who speaks on Zoom a lot, the chat box pops up and covers over the slides and is very distracting. So so if you can chat directly to me, it won't pop up on Colin's screen. And then at the end, we'll have lots of time for questions. We don't have necessarily a set end time here. So as long as Colin's willing, we're good to go. One other thing, if you are, if English is not your first language, there should be the option of closed captioning, which will only show up on your screen. And Zoom is quite good these days of showing kind of, capturing the language so that it'll pop up either as captions as Colin's speaking, or you can say show transcript, and the transcript will be a separate window that's kind of running as you go along, and you can hide the captions that pop up. So those are 2 options if you would like to get a running transcript going. I think that's available to everyone. Okay, take it away, Colin. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. And welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to this talk. I'll try, before I start, I'll try to do 2 things: not to use any Australian slang words or use too many Australianisms, because you will have no idea what I'm talking about. So,
but we want to hear both of those. That's what the clarifying questions are for. Carry on.
It's also interesting how you mentioned a while ago that working with natural systems, and that's really exactly what I've done. I've mimicked natural systems as closely as I possibly can, and Mother Nature had it right in the first place, and I think it can be quite simple to fix many of our problems on this planet by mimicking natural systems. Because the blueprint's already been written, we don't need to reinvent anything really. So I'll just start now. Hopefully I can find this correct presentation.
Take your time. There you go.
Okay. I often have different titles for talks, but this one I've just titled it that there, How to Restore Our Farms. And as I said earlier, it can be a lot simpler than than we're often told about how we can restore our farms. It doesn't have to be complicated. Certainly doesn't have to be expensive. Too many people are making too much money from farmers at farmers' expense. Whoops, right. Just a little bit on me here. There's 2,000 acres here, we run here. It's 2,000 miles or 300 kilometres northwest of Sydney. That little orange dot there in the map of Australia is where I am. It's not heavy black soils. It is just granite soil, 26-inch rainfall, and now it's a restored native grassland. It wasn't always. A little bit of information on our enterprises here. We mainly run merino. Gee, my voice has gone before I start. We mostly run merino sheep and have for 150 years or more run 4,000 merino sheep. And sometimes we run cattle, but not that often, mostly for just finishing. About a quarter of the place is grown sown to crops. At the moment, we've been growing oats. We have a ram breeding enterprise as well, and also Kelpie dogs, which we sell dogs all over the world. Kelpies are an Australian working dog, for people that didn't know. And one of the more interesting enterprises that's come out of the change in the way I do things is native grass seed harvesting and selling Australian native grassland species. Question that we should all ask ourselves: can we farm forever? And I would suggest that the way farming around the world is being practiced now is no, we can't. That agriculture is practiced is doomed to fail, and it is crashing. The wheels are falling off our agricultural practices all over the world. But yes, we can farm forever if we change what we're doing now. And it isn't that difficult. It just needs incentive to do it. So to partly answer that is why and how did I change? And to really answer that is I need to look at what happened to my family. And I guess I have the luxury in one way in that my family's been on this farm since 1868. Not me personally, but my great-grandparents settled here in 1868, and I'm fourth generation on the farm. My young grandson has started working on the farm here now, and he's sixth generation. So anything that's happened on this farm, we've caused it. Any problems on it, it's only one family to blame, and that's us. So it's interesting to be able to look at those changes and what worked and what didn't over many years. So my family certainly have been part of the problem. My great-grandparents, Nicholas and Catherine Size, was some of the original settlers here, 1860. They started with merino sheep and wool and started growing wheat in 1868. I'm going to miss a few years now and look at what my father did. He adopted industrial agriculture in the 1930s, changed from horse teams and started growing wheat. He was always running a merino sheep for wool, but he started growing wheat with machinery and tractors in the 1930s. And although it worked well for about 20 years, it ended up a disaster. And it certainly worked well to start with. He grew some magnificent crops without fertilizer and without pesticides, but he continued farming and created some serious problems. The photo on the right, fortunately, my mother took a lot of photos in that era with a little camera that she had, and she took a photo of this. Unfortunately, took a photo of this wedge-tailed eagle that my father had shot. Wouldn't want to shoot one now. It'd be huge fines for shooting them. But they are a huge eagle. They're over 6 feet wingspan. And people think that they kill sheep and lambs, but I've never had any problems with them at all. But behind that eagle, which is strung across a fence, is an erosion gully already starting just 5 years after my father started growing crops. So he did a huge amount of damage really quickly when he started growing wheat. The damage he did was a great source of embarrassment to him, and he adopted the best science he could at the time and started to fix the erosion problems and soil problems. And he adopted industrial agriculture, or Green Revolution agriculture is really what it is, in the 1950s. And the Green Revolution, as many of you may know, was all about the introduction of a lot of more fertilizers and pesticides and that form of agriculture that we often use today. So what he was doing, and I'm going to move through this quite quickly, what he was doing, it was also to introduce pastures, and those pastures were fertilized. He was ploughing and cultivating to sow crops, grow crops, and he had just what we call a set stock grazing system with the sheep, no rotation, and that high input method was really quite successful in that era. It worked really well for him and people that adopted it in the 1950s. I came home from school in the 1970s and continued the destruction of the farm. And when I see these photos there, like I'm attracted with my dog. I always have dogs with me. But it was fortunate my father only gave me a small tractor and plough to plough the soil with, because I would have done a lot more damage than I did if I had something a bit bigger. So, and he did what every father on the land does, with farms does, puts their son on the tractor as soon as they come home from school, which is exactly what happened to me. On the bottom photo there is just a photo of my brother and I spraying our earth mites, insects, with DDT, which was certainly not good in hindsight. Now, in that era, I was growing plants that want to die and killing plants that want to live. It was not very sensible. And that's really what we tend to do today. Not here now, but that's what agriculture is about: killing plants that want to live and growing plants that want to die. Over time, industrial agriculture is doing serious damage to the property, ecological damage. Now, no one puts ecology into agriculture, but that's the key to fixing our problems. Those high input methods with high fertilizer and pesticides were costing my father's era, $100,000 annually on today's figures. So, but it didn't last long. That form of agriculture that my father was very much a pioneer in, it was started to crash in the 1970s. Fertilizer became too high and the crop costs of resowing pastures became too high. Soil lost structure, and that was related to low water infiltration, acidic soil, salinity problems, trees dying. And really, in that era, in my father's era, things were getting fairly tight financially, and looked like we might have been going broke. So how did I fix those problems? Now, I had this problem solved for me because in 1979 we had a major bushfire in the US called wildfires, and it destroyed everything on the farm. Destroyed those photos there of the homestead. The original house was burnt, and we'd call it a shearing barn, but a shearing shed. We would shear out our sheep. There was 3,000 sheep killed, all the buildings destroyed, all the fencing destroyed, and we were instantly broke overnight after that. And the whole farm was burnt in that. So how do you survive from that? Well, having a sense of humour is a good way of handling that. But the fire force been to change everything. I changed the way I grazed animals and the way I grew crops. I reduced the amount of fertiliser and pesticide, and I restored the farm and soils to function as ecosystems. That is the key to just about restoring all agricultural practices. Now, our farms should function as ecosystems. People get a bit confused with this at times. I'm not sure why, but it's how Mother Nature works, really. Natural ecosystems are self-sustaining and resilient. Everything, plants, animals, soil, and the environment are interconnected and self-supporting. Now, if you just look at that and run our farms that way, it'll work. It can't not work. The way I was grazing animals was not working. Just a bit on grazing management here now. So the way the animals were grazed certainly wasn't working. The animals were doing serious damage to the farm and soil, pasture, and profit. Now, the problem with that is not the animals. People immediately blame the animals for damage that's being done on soil, but it's the human managing the animals that's the problem, not the animals themselves. So I changed the grazing management to holistic plan grazing in 1993. Just quickly here on what we're doing. Normally, when we've got full stock numbers here, there's 2,500 adult sheep plus cattle when we've got them grazing in one mob. And that photo there is that mob of sheep. There's 2,500 sheep in there. My son's just moving them through a gateway. 75 paddocks, individual paddocks on the farm. There's about 30 acres in each of those, and 3 to 4 months plant recovery time. And sheep are used to prepare paddocks to sow crops, as in pasture cropping, which I'm going to talk about very shortly. So that form of grazing certainly works. There's no doubt about that. Alan Savory was the person that did most of the development work with that. And he really is the one that showed people how to graze animals. And Alan developed that form of grazing off natural systems. He observed the way animals moved in Africa and in huge mobs, and mimicked that and encouraged that form of grazing, the way animals naturally move. And the photo there is again, well, it's a mob of 2,500 ewes with their lambs. So there's 5,000 sheep in that mob, and they're just being moved through a gateway at that time when I took that photo. You certainly can't fit all of those sheep in one photograph. So, but that form of grazing will encourage the growth of perennial grassland species. It discourage the growth of annual weeds. It improves soil structure and soil health, improves nutrient cycle. It enables drought planning, and we can certainly make more profit with that. So it always makes me wonder why more people don't do it. It certainly works very well. There's a lot more. I'll just go back on that. There's a lot more to grazing than what I've got in there, and certainly good to do a holistic management grazing course for people that are serious about getting better grazing practices on their farms. So the other thing that I did is I changed the way I grow crops. Now, this has got a bit of history to this. the way this developed. A lot of people think that I'm very clever and developed this method of growing crops, which actually is totally different way of growing crops that's ever been developed. But a good friend of mine, Darryl Clough, and I, we used to get together. He's a fellow farmer who lives not far from me. Get together and discuss the problems of the world, as you do. The photo there is actually a bottle of Australian beer. And we used to solve our problems quite often over a beer or 10. And this particular night, we had quite a lot of these. And the idea of pasture cropping came out of about 10 bottles of beer. So we were already no-tilling or zero-tilling, both of us. And what we reasoned was why we were using huge amounts of herbicide to kill perennial grasses that go dormant in the winter, which is when we plant our crops. So those grasses are gone to sleep for the winter. There was really no reason why we needed to kill them. So that's where the idea of pasture cropping came from. Now, before I started, Darryl and I started developing pasture cropping, what was happening on the farm here is that our grasslands and pastures were being destroyed every time that we planted a crop. It destroyed the soil structure, soil lost nutrients, soil lost carbon, and we had soil erosion problems and increasing fertilizer and pesticide problems. Ploughing the soil is a total disaster. And one of the worst things ever invented is a plough. However, we've been ploughing soil for nearly 10,000 years. And a lot of the damage being done on this planet is directly related to ploughs. That was followed up with herbicides now, which aren't really much better. So now, growing crops by ploughing destroyed managed grassland and soil, but with modern cropping methods using herbicides and pesticides, simply replace the plough with a boom spray and herbicides. It hadn't changed. It didn't change the philosophy of farming at all. All it did was replace the plough, a plough or a cultivation with herbicide. So that was part of the problem. It wasn't any great change in the way things grow on. Zero tilling or no till is certainly a great advance in growing crops, but it isn't the total answer. I need a better way of growing crops that did not kill pasture and destroy soil. So I had to look at, certainly I sold my plough to start with and on all the cultivation and tillage equipment, and then started to look at other ways of managing weeds. I developed pasture cropping in 1993 and multi-species pasture cropping in 2010. Now, pasture cropping is actually perennial cover cropping. That photo there really illustrates pasture cropping quite well. We'll probably come back to that photo. Pasture cropping is perennial cover cropping, where annual crops are zero-tilled or no-tilled into dormant perennial grass or grassland. Now, it sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's a bit like growing anything. There's a few things to learn in this to set yourself up so you're going to be successful with it. That's just a graph. This is a Southern Hemisphere graph, so everything's around the reverse for anyone here in the Northern Hemisphere. And what it's showing, I'm planting crops into predominantly warm season grasslands where they go dormant in the winter. And the pink line there is an illustration, well, not necessarily an illustration, it really shows what happens to a warm season plant. Grows really quite fast and vigorously through the summer months. As the season gets cooler, it goes into winter dormancy and shuts down totally in colder environments. Here, I might add, it doesn't snow here, so it's not extremely cold, but we do get frost. Where that dormant period is an ideal time to plant a cereal crop. Now, I'm only planting small grains here. I don't grow corn or soybean. So oats, wheat, barley, those types of crops. I'm going to get onto multi-species crops in a minute, but they're sown exactly the same way as that. So, and that graph illustrates how grasslands function, including the ones in the Northern Hemisphere, well, especially in the US, ones where you have a mix of warm season and cool season plants. Now, we need to remember when we're talking about this form of growing crops, grazing and cropping are interconnected and complement each other. And that saves a lot on costs of production. Also, it adds more enterprises to the mix with no extra costs or less costs. Just some photos here of what we're doing. That drill is a disc air seeder, and sowing into dormant perennial grasslands there. Often we graze, sorry, I should backtrack a bit. Before that, sown is grazed and grazed quite hard. Often there's not quite as what there's more of that dormant grass on the soil surface than there is there. Illustrates it a bit better here. That crop's been planted into thick, really thick grassland or grass, and surprise, it actually looks like a vegetable patch or a garden, and that's really how we should be farming. In a vegetable patch, we put a lot of mulch and litter on the soil surface. In this case, we're growing that mulch and litter in a perennial system. That's the crop part of the way through. Crop of oats and harvesting that, and then we have really good, very high quality stock feed, sheep feed and cattle feed after that crop is harvested, and that's the warm season grasses emerging in that stuff in the oat stubble. Now we usually, well, almost always harvest native seed after the crop is harvested and before the crop is grown, so we're harvesting seed twice a year. Now, that seed is sold for revegetation work, and there's a lot of work being done, which I'm involved in. Seed, Australian Aboriginal people here lived off the grasslands, as native people all over the world did, lived off the grasslands, and that was their main food source. And a lot of the grain from grasslands is edible, and there's a lot of work being done now in relearning a lot of the uses of these grassland species for human consumption. Multi-species crops. Now, in 2010, I got thinking about what would happen if I sowed a multi-species crop into a multi-species perennial grassland. Now, our grassland now has 60 species in it. Now, what would happen if I planted a multi-species crop which had 10 or more species into that grassland? So I started doing that. I started sowing multi-species crops into grassland in 2010, and it's now called multi-species pasture cropping. But the species that are used are very similar to the species that are used in cover crops around the world. But the multi-species in my case are not the cover. The grassland is the cover in my case. So there's just a photo. There's quite a few different photos here, just of a multi-species mix sown in the grassland. Another one there, just different species that I'm using: oats, radish, and brassicas. It's very, very similar in standard mixes. There's nothing overcomplicated about that. Now, I won't go into it here, but that particular crop, I let it all that seed ripen at once and harvested all of that seed at once. And it was interesting, we can harvest a grain from a multi-species crop. I used it mostly just to resow again, but it does give us a lot more options if we can do that, and it's not that difficult. So if we have a mix of 4 to 10 forage species, it does produce excellent quality forage, which is something that's been overlooked with cover crops. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It restores soil ecosystems, and also primes the soil, just the same as a multi-species, or sorry, as a cover crop. Now, I could see great benefit in grazing these multi-species crops. Now, remember, they are the same species or similar species to what people are using in covers. So the same thing can be done with covers. It doesn't necessarily need to be pasture crop. So, but I could see really good animal performance on these multi-species mixes, and like animals were just doing so much better on them, and faster fattening and growth rates and that. So I did a grazing trial here, and we set up and monitored really carefully independently, and just divided the paddock in two and planted one half with multi-species mix and the other half with a barley crop, single species, and that's the mix we used. I've got that in pounds per acre for. I thought a lot of people on this webinar would be from the US and more used to pounds per acre than kilograms per hectare. So a little bit of normal fertilizer I put under that as well, just to wanted it close to how most people would do this in relation to fertilizers. The costs of it was more expensive to sow the multi-species mix than the barley, as it shows on there, $76 an acre compared to $58 an acre. The grazing results are actually quite spectacular, and this is in pounds. But if we just to move through it quickly, the weight gain on the multi-species crop compared to the single species in 57 days, or 2 months, was double. 18.8 pound compared to 37.6 pound. That's gains on not the total weight of those lambs. It's the weight gain in 57 days. Now, if we go down the bottom, which I can't see properly on this, the profit per hectare is virtually double as well. So but there's more to the story than that. We did a soil test before and after on this as well. Only a 6-inch soil test, not a deep test. We're normally testing carbon to a metre deep now, but this one was only a 6-inch soil test. Now, under the multi-species crop compared to a single species, the carbon, as you can see there, increased by 21% compared to -15 on the single species barley crop. Nitrogen increased on the multi-species, decreased on the single species, and the same right through. I was quite surprised at this result. That was only done within 6 months of sowing that crop. Now, not all of those nutrients increased. Some did stay the same, some decreased, but the multi-species crop was always better than the single species. Now, so that was has turned out to be quite a valuable small on-farm trial to show the benefits of a mix of species, and that's the key to a lot of this. It's of agriculture generally. We should be growing mixes of everything. In natural systems, we had great diversity of plants. Our grasslands in Australia here had 300 species in them, and I would bet the US grasslands would have had more than that. So and here we're growing one or two species together. That's never at all. That's not the way natural systems function at all. Single species. So there's some work done, not on the farm here, but about 10 hours south of where I am here with multi-species mixed grazing steers. Not for as long a period, but they were putting on 3.5 pounds a day, or 1.6 kilos per hectare per day. Sorry, on that mix. So it's a similar from a grazing performance on that mix as well on a different farm with cattle. Trials and research work. Now, the property here is one of the most researched in Australia. Probably one, certainly more as researched as any farm in the world, probably. Most of the universities in Australia have been doing work and studies here. The Land Institute in Kansas has also done studies on pasture cropping as well. So what did I do on the farm here? I changed the grazing management to holistic planned grazing in 93, and the way I grew crops in 1993, and developed pasture cropping, multi-species pasture cropping in 2010, and shelters everywhere, right across the farm. So what were the results? Certainly restored grassland, perennial grassland. Now that was restored. I didn't plant any grassland species. The change in management stimulated the germination of seed that was in the soil. So I didn't plant any native grassland species. And if we do it well, we can restore grasslands anywhere in the world. The work at the Land Institute showed in Kansas showed that the increase in grassland species in the work they did there as well. Now we have the grassland species increased from 10% to over 80% since this is only since 1999, decreased from 60% weeds to less than 5%. And the grassland species have increased now to 60. Now we've used no insecticide for over 30 years, and we don't have insect attack in crops and pastures. Restore and the reason why we don't get insect attack anymore, and many things. Restoring grassland will restore the farm ecosystem, and restoring the farm ecosystem has restored insect numbers and insect diversity. That diversity of insects, including spiders, are controlling the crop damaging and plant damaging insects. But it's better than that and more significant than that. Restoring the whole farm ecosystem by restoring grasslands and tree plantings have contributed to increase in bird, animal, and reptile species diversity. It now the property now has 115 bird species on it. They're all Australian native species. 4 macropods, which are kangaroo species, different types of kangaroos. Anticlinus, which is the little guy at the top, which looks like a mouse or a rat. It's a marsupial mouse. The pretty faced guy in the middle and the bottom is a squirrel glider. They actually fly. They've got skin between their front and back legs, and they glide from out of trees. So they're here as well as huge amounts of bird species. So build it and they will come is true. And all that I've done is restore the farm ecosystem, restore the grassland and the soils, and everything has returned. And I think fixing farms is very simple. We can fix the whole lot all at once. We can fix a farm like our farm soils and everything, and restore our animal and bird population just all in one go. We don't need to fix one thing at a time. So we haven't used fungicide on the property for over 30 years. We have no crop or pasture diseases. And that's because our soil microbial tests are showing huge increases in fungi and protozoa and bacteria and nematodes. And so that's managing our crop diseases. We haven't used fertiliser on pastures for over 43 years, and we reduced the crop fertiliser by 70%, and now we're using more biological products and could use and do use organic products as well. But and that's happening by plants. Plants and soil microbes make soil nutrients available, and living, growing plants are the drivers of soil health, soil structure, and nutrient cycling. Now, this is just a few. I'm just going to touch quickly on this. There's been a lot of measurements done on these two paddocks, and they're adjoining paddocks. One on the right is my neighbour's property, and the one on the left is mine. I changed, the neighbour stayed the same, and the results have been quite dramatic. I changed with the methods that I've just mentioned on one on the left to the pastures and grassland and soil. Now, on the soil here, these are soil samples that have been taken to 2 feet or 60 centimetres, and the one on the left, the carbon's increased by 200%, and as you can see from that photo, now we have there's about a foot of topsoil there. Now it's hard to tell where the topsoil starts and ends on that. The other one on the right there, the topsoil is only 4 inches or 100 millimetres thick. So now it's this is in tonnes per hectare here. The property, and especially this paddock here, has sequestered almost 60 tonne of carbon per hectare, it's removed 213 tonne per hectare of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stored it in the soil. So we can fix our soil, and in the process, if we can, more and more farmers can adopt these methods, we can start removing a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it in our soils, which will certainly start to address a lot of our climate change problems. Our soils can and do hold a lot more water now, and interestingly, all of the soil nutrients, including trace elements, have increased by an average of 162%. There's been no fertiliser put on, and that includes calcium. pH has changed from the low 5s to over 6. No lime being put on the property, either of those properties. Okay, just to sum all this up quickly, is it profitable? That $100,000 we used to spend, I don't spend at all now. So I'm $100,000 better off every year. And that's because we don't spend it on fertiliser and pesticides and vet costs. We don't re-establish pastures, and the farm ecosystem is driving it really. So our income is higher. We're running more livestock. Crop yields are similar, and we're harvesting 2 tonne of native grass seed a year, and all those nutrients are increasing. So how did I restore our farm? It was actually quite simple. This is not complicated stuff. Change the way we raise animals, change the way we grow crops. I restored the grassland, but what I really did was did the whole lot of those. Added more enterprises to the mix as well, to the farm. Now, and the really answer to this is to grow more plants. And if we grow more plants, we can certainly make far more money. Plants will restore our farm soils and profit. It is that simple. Plant diversity is the key, not monocultures of plants, but plant diversity in our cropping systems and in our pastures or in grasslands. Yes, we can farm forever, but only if we stop fighting against Mother Nature and farm with natural systems. Thank you. We've probably got some questions.
Thank you so much, Colin. That was marvelous. Yes, yeah, very important to show your book. It's available on your website. I think is that the best place to get it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, the best place. Yeah. Okay. And I don't know how that works in terms of people in the US ordering it. Is it easy enough
Yeah,
to
that,
get here?
yep,
Great.
that still works out okay price wise, because our dollar's quite low, so at the moment, so
Yeah.
it's
But in terms of getting
it's
it here and
dollar
shipping is not a
36
problem.
prices. Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. So yeah, take a snapshot of that, Custodians of the Grasslands. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. And you also do some online courses. Are those still happening?
Yeah. There's an online course available as well. Yeah.
And is that mostly a kind of a how-to course, or is it more
Yeah.
theoretical? Or
Use a how-to
okay,
course.
okay. So
Yeah.
for the farmers out there, that might be of great interest.
Yeah.
Great. I was while people are putting the questions into the chat, this is a good time to put your questions in the chat, and we'll look through them, and that way, if there are numerous people with a similar question, we can kind of combine them, and I can help steward it through. We will open it up more for just discussion in a little bit as well, more informally. But one of the things that stood out for me, because I've been hearing this from other places as well, is about the wool quality. And that the wool quality increased. And my understanding is that that's because the plants are getting more access to nutrients through more mycorrhizal relationships underground.
That's right. Yeah.
Because there are more plants there, they're in there for longer, etc. They can go down deeper, they can explore more with better aggregated soils. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about the wool quality and what that even means, because I think that's a very intriguing metric.
With wool itself, as in sheep, to make sure I'm talking about the right stuff. Yep. Some of the reason the wool quality has improved is now we've got very even feed through the year. If when a sheep is growing wool, if they get going to a feed deficit time, the wool growth slows down, and you get a weakness in the wool fiber. Just so the wool's sort of 4 to 6 inches long, get a weakness in the fiber, and that wool is not worth anywhere near as much. So that's one of the reasons why. But certainly the increasing improvement in soil nutrients is also contributing to that, and animal health as well.
Great. Let's see. I just wanted to read Dave's comment. Dave, if you want to unmute, go ahead and say that out loud. That I can read it, but if you're right there and want to unmute about the
Sure.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, just
Hi,
remember,
welcome.
those are Australian dollars, so don't have a heart attack when you look at the website. Colin reminded me those are Australian dollars. To order it to the US only cost me about $35 when it first came out. It's totally worth it. I think it's the most important book I've read in the last 5 years.
Right. Yes. And also just reading here, science plus family history is a great combination in one book, as it is in one presentation, which is part of what struck me all those years ago when I first met you. Really, really nice to see that put together, because, we hear about the Dust Bowl, or we hear about this or that, but making it personal. And this is what it actually looked like in this place before and after. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I've always thought that there's not much point in complaining about how things have been in the past or even are now, unless you've got some answers. So, anyone can complain about what's wrong and say what's wrong, but we need to have some answers to our problems. And okay, we need to be aware we've got problems, but we need answers as well.
Yeah. All right, Henry Swayze, who I know has farmed sheep for a long time and done a lot of fencing around the world. Do you want to unmute and ask your question? if you are there, Henry. Otherwise, I can read it.
There we go.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll actually go for a 2-4 here. I'm curious whether when you harvested seed from a crop that had grown on your improved land, whether you got better results from that harvested seed than you did from the original seed, and if you could comment on what you think is going on there. And a second question, and I came in late on this, so you may have talked about it, but when you're doing multi-species, how do you avoid encouraging one species over another when you're making your paddock grazing decisions?
Okay. I'll answer that last question first. Part of that is getting the mix right, getting the combination of seeds, the combination of plants correct. What I've found in practice is if animals don't know what a plant is, they'll tend to avoid it for a while, and that plant can get an advantage and grow for more than the others. But once they taste it and get used to it, they're fine. They'll just eat everything quite evenly. So I've never had any real problems with that, like eating at least for a very long period of time, eating some plants preferentially over the others. But it is good to get a mix, especially like in the US. That probably the best place to get seed is green cover seed, but there's a few people supplying seed now. They've been in that business for a long time. And the first one, I think there is an advantage in keeping your own seed to plant on your own property, and because it does seem to adapt to that environment over time. So there is an advantage in that, and there's a bit of science on that. I know Dr. Christine Jones talks a fair bit about that type of stuff as well. And Chris and I know Chris, we know each other quite well and share a lot of information and have over a long period of time. But that's another story. But so hopefully that answered your questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Great job you've done in presentation as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. Gerald is also commenting here about green cover seeds in Nebraska. So if folks aren't familiar with green cover seeds, they're a great company, really nice people. They're real pioneers in having a lot of seeds and really working well with people who are doing multi-species cover cropping or pasture cropping. And they have like cover crop calculators and things like that, so that they'll work with you whatever region you're in. I'm assuming they sell at other countries. They're not just the US. Is that true? I think that's probably true. So, but in any case, they're
certainly don't sell it. That's Australia. Difficult to get seed to Australia, but in Australia, any Australians here, Grant Sims in Victoria is doing mixes now. So, but that
what's the name, Colin? Because we do have quite a few Australians, and it's true. Sending seeds abroad. Actually, I'm realizing, of course, that's not so easy, because then you get into agricultural customs laws and things.
Yep.
So who is that? What's the name in Australia?
Down Undercovers.
Grant
Sims.
Yep, Down Undercovers. Yep.
Okay, Down Undercovers. That's a great name. Great name too. Chris from the Northeast Kingdom in Vermont asked to please describe in greater detail the reduction in vet costs. Chris, if that's your main question, I'll just read it rather than have you say it, because it sounds pretty simple, but feel free to unmute if you want to.
Yeah. The main advantage the main reduction in vet costs has been internal parasites or worms, and that's related to not only a healthier diet but a grazing rotation as well. Like a grazing rotation allows long plant recovery time before the animals regraze that area. And so internal parasites are often can be controlled quite well with those good grazing rotations, providing there are long enough recovery time. That's been the main veterinary costs or reduction in veterinary costs, significant reduction in drenching for worms or internal parasites.
I have two related questions. One is, do you use dewormers? And I mean, do you use deworming medicine regularly, like prophylactically, or only as a treatment?
Generally, yeah, we do. Well, I do tests for worm eggs. So if they don't need it, we certainly don't give it to them. So it's not automatic. But usually, in saying what I just did, we've reduced our number of drenches by about 6 per year, and now, yeah, so it's quite significant.
Wow. And do you think that the increase in the bird population has anything to do with that? Because I know some people, will run chickens or some other thing after grazing to peck at what's in the poop leavings there in the manure. So, but I'm wondering if because I'm not hearing you saying that you're having chickens or chooks, but you do have an enormous bird population, which I would think would serve the same function.
Yeah, it could, although not as it's certainly not as intensive as chickens are grazed. However, there's a lot we don't know. Like when you start restoring a full ecosystem, there's a lot that we don't know about the benefits of that. We know the obvious ones, but there's probably a lot more there that we don't fully understand at all. It's certainly when we start restoring soils and grow more plants, we get a far greater diversity of soil microbes to start with, which drives huge changes as well. There's most likely now, and we don't know for sure, medicinal plants in our grasslands now, which certainly will give health benefits to animals.
Yes, if anyone, for those who are interested, Fred Provenza's work, Nourishment, is a fantastic book. It's a long read, but even if you just flip around and read parts of it, like I tend to do, there's a tremendous amount of great information in there about those kinds of things that you were just speaking to, about having antiparasitics, that in terms of what, animals eat this first and then that. One thing I'll just pop in with about worms and other parasites, that from my own research in The Ecology of Care, which is my book, that worms, a small population of worms, is actually very preventive against autoimmune diseases. So that's another interesting piece of it, that we're not meant to be completely parasite free, and obviously neither are our soils. So okay, let's see. Ralph, I see you have your hand up. And I also see a question in here. Could you talk a bit more regarding fertilizing? I'm curious that you're still fertilizing the crop, though not the soil, for about the last 30 years. Yeah, that is actually, I think, an important question. Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to that, Colin, about the fertilizer and your choices there?
I was waiting for another question. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, read it again, DD. I don't think he heard it.
Oh, why don't you go ahead and say it, Ralph, because you're right there.
I've forgotten it. Have you got it?
Oh, okay.
Okay,
You
I'm
were
sorry.
asking, no, that's okay. Could you talk a bit more regarding your fertilizer use? I'm curious that you still fertilize, though you fertilize some things and not others, for the last 30 years. So
fertilizing the crop, but haven't fertilized the soil for 30 years.
Yeah.
And it made sense to me about the soil, but I was curious that you still find it necessary to fertilize the crop. And could you just touch on that for us, if you don't
Thank
mind?
you, Ralph. Yeah.
Very good question. So over time, as far as fertilizer, phosphorus fertilizer on pastures, I haven't put any on since the fire in 1979, and that was an economic decision and a good one. When I first stopped, we saw phosphorus deficiencies in the plants, but I couldn't afford to put any fertilizer on, so I didn't. And then eventually, the soil, as I didn't know at the time, but what's happened is the soil started to balance. So the soil ecosystem was restoring itself and getting nutrients back naturally, and our measurements have shown that. And so there was certainly no need, and is no need to put fertilizer on pastures. The only real reason I'm putting a bit of fertilizer on, and it is a really low amount, is under our crops. And in units, it's only 7 kilograms of nitrogen and 7 kilograms per acre per hectare of phosphorus. That's all there is. So that's units. So it's very little, very, very low amounts. The nitrogen, I know, does help a bit, and because we are chasing some yields, I have done that. I've used a lot of different things. I've used certainly compost extracts, worm leachate, a lot of different products, and I think they're probably very good. I think probably the main reason that I'm still using some fertilizer is a bit of a security blanket. That's all it is. I think we probably need it, but most likely not. So, and a lot of any fertilizer, certainly any nutrient deficiencies can be addressed by biological and organic fertilizers now. I could be organic if I wanted to be. I just choose not to be because I don't want any restrictions at all. I want to be able to just experiment with whatever I think might be necessary. And that's really the main reason. I have no great philosophy on or any great thing. Nothing wrong with organic or biodynamic or any of those things. It's just that I don't want any restrictions on anything I do.
Have you done any trials where you've tried with and without the fertilizer?
Yeah, I have. Yep. And there's certainly a reduction in yield because it's only granite soils. It's quite poor soil, so quite low in nitrogen, or at least available. And yeah, so the crops do see a difference there. I have done that, but I could grow crops without fertilizer. The yields would be a bit lower, but probably more profitable though.
I realize I missed a question from Ludmila. What's the minimum annual precipitation rate at which pasture cropping still works well? Which I think is another great question.
Yep, yeah, good. Some of the areas, like in Australia, where pasture cropping is still successful, is only about in inches, is 11 or 12 inch rainfall. And it'll work if you can grow, if there's enough rain to grow a cereal crop like a oat crop or a wheat crop. Pasture cropping will work. There's no real restrictions. If you can grow a crop there, you could certainly do that. Also, in Australia, where 11 or 12 inch rainfall, the evaporation rate is very high. Also, so it's different because of our hot climate. I guess it's similar to like Texas, or colder than Texas, even Mexico or something. Although without the humidity.
Also from Ludmilla, have you tried something like Martin Williams polycropping combo in your pasture cropping scenario?
I guess I am polycropping, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah,
Ludmilla,
Martin's
do
not
you
that.
want to, if you're still here, do you want to say more about what that is? Because I'm not sure. I don't know that particular thing.
Yes, I think it's a combination of peas, fava beans, a small seeded brassica like mustard or canola, and oats and barley, all planted
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that one photo I showed there of a mix that I only showed one photo. I didn't show it loaded with a mix of 7 or 8 species there. That was that. That was just simply a winter mix, and we harvested all those species at once. So yeah, we have done that, and often do many years that some of these multi-species mixes we still can harvest them.
Can I ask
And-
a follow-up question? You mentioned Grant Seams, and he mentioned talking to you about DIY farm-made bioferts. Have you ever made any bioferments on your farm, and have you tested them in pasture cropping system?
Just repeat that. I missed that. I missed that.
You mentioned Grant Seams, and Grant
Yeah.
talked about speaking with you about DIY farm-made biofertilizers. And I was wondering if you had a chance to make any bioferments on your farm and if you have tested the farm-made bioferts on your farm.
Yeah. No, I haven't used biofertilizers. No. But yeah, Grant and I did a talk together 12 months or so ago, and yeah, and we were talking about that. Grant's also, he's been doing a bit of work on biofertilizers as well. So,
Right.
but I haven't used any here. I've only used worm leachate and compost extract and those types of fertilizers.
Thanks, Ludmilla. Tim from Central Texas is asking, can you talk about the type of plant or seeder you find to be best for pasture cropping to get good seed to soil contact?
Yeah. I'll talk with what I had here. You need to remember when I first started developing all this, I was working with no money at all, and so I started to develop my own machinery, or at least convert machinery to plant with, and all that I did was use a normal seed drill and change the tines on it, which in the US you call them hoe planters, with a very, very narrow point, which was about a ½ inch wide point in the soil, and that worked fine. There was more ground disturbance in that, but it's really, really low cost to convert one of those machines, which is partly why I did it, and partly why a lot of people in Australia convert them as well. Like an existing seed drill can be converted to no-till. Well, there's some disturbance with a hoe type planter, but at very low cost. And so that's what I started with, and it worked fine. It worked really well. There's no problems at all. We need to also remember some of our soils when we first start are really hard and compacted, and often a disc drill, as good as that disc drill may be, will not get as good results as if there's a little bit more disturbance, soil disturbance. Now, I've got to be careful when I say this, because people think of disturbance of a big plough and ploughing everything and turning everything upside down. That's not what I'm talking about. All I'm talking about is just enough disturbance to get the seed in the soil, and then in my drill on foot spacings, there's a foot between each row. Okay, so that can be a really low cost way of getting into this without spending $100,000 or $200,000 on a seed drill. However, now I use a disc. That machine I showed you it's got discs on it, so, and it goes through a lot more material, a lot more mulch and litter and grasses than a tine or a hoe type. So I hope that was a long-winded way of explaining it.
No,
but
I
that
think it's
was-
actually a very key question for those people who are thinking about trying some things here. And Tim, you had a follow-up question. Do you want to unmute and ask that?
Sure. I hope y'all can hear me okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that response. The reason I asked about that is I've just planted my first 7-way mix with an old 1960s John Deere grain drill that I rehabbed into standing biomass, warm season biomass on an NRCS contract for cover crop. And it came up pretty good, but I can see how as I get more perennial root masses in, that I'm going to have a little more trouble getting consistent seed to soil contact. So I'm just curious kind of as your perennial systems developed or whatnot. So thank you for that. And I'll continue to do some research. Secondly was just, could you describe a little bit about your seed harvest process to someone that doesn't really have any background on seed harvest or even grain harvest, but is really considering these concepts heavily as I'm transitioning into managing some family land?
I presume you're talking about harvesting grain, like cereal grain, I assume there. In relation to pasture cropping, people often ask me the question that how do you not get other seed in with the grain? What happens? And if I had the slides here, I could show you. Because we're working with warm season grass, C4 perennial grass, and putting a winter crop into it, the crop itself suppresses and slows the growth of the grass, the warm season grass, right up to the point of harvesting the grain. Those warm season grasses don't like being in the shade of the crop, so they don't grow very actively until the crop is harvested and they get full sunlight on them. They need full sunlight. So if that's what you were thinking, that one grain but not get it contaminated with other seeds, that it happens almost virtually naturally. The grass gets suppressed by the crop itself and shade.
Yeah, I don't know if Tim, feel free to unmute up, but in the meantime, I'll say, we visited Brendan Rocky, potato farmer, who was also harvesting. I don't know if you've met Brendan, but was harvesting various kinds of, beans and seeds and whatever from his cover crop. And he had made, had something that would sorted everything out according to size. And I think he had 16 different things growing at that point. This was many years ago. But
yeah, but that's what I do if I harvest a multi-species mix as well. I put it through a seed cleaner.
okay.
Yeah.
Tim, did that answer your questions?
That did. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Gerald, are you still here from Nebraska? You're asking about untreated crop seeds.
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
Great. Do you want to go ahead and ask about that?
Well, of course, most of the multinational seed companies, whether it's Pioneer, Syngenta, or Corteva, whatever name they go by, it's very hard to get untreated seed for any crop. I mean, green cover seeds is great, but they really don't have, like, for grain crops, like corn or soybeans. They're working with somebody for those, but can he get like other crop seeds that are untreated if he needs to buy them?
And I'll just, for those who aren't directly involved in farming, by untreated, you're meaning like no neonicotinoid pesticides that are on the seeds, or no fungicides coated on the seeds. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Fungicides and insecticides.
There are some places in the States that have created laws about treated seeds, but that the farmers can't access the seed. So it's like they can't actually enforce the law.
It's a problem worldwide. That one I use ideally as much as I can. Well, I do. I don't use treated seed at all. Not much point trying to build up soil microbial diversity if you're killing it with a fungicide. I was at Green Covers about 2 weeks ago, and I do know that they are dealing in selling straight seed. They had, I'm not sure about corn, but I know that they're selling fairly large quantities of just untreated seed, not in mixes as well.
Great. And in Australia, you're able to get that? I
Yeah,
mean, I
Grant seems
know you're not growing corn and soy, but
no, but Grant's his seeds aren't treated. Grant Sims aren't. So that's probably the main one I know of in Australia that is not untreated seed.
great.
That-
Okay, thanks. Dave, from the Pacific Northwest. Are you still here?
I am, just curious, have people tried to adapt your principles where it's colder and drier?
Colder and drier
Missed the last-
regions.
in
Whether
colder
people
and
yeah.
drier. There's a little bit. I'm just trying to think. In Australia, cold and dry. Plenty of dry places, not a lot of cold places. So, Tasmania, there's a bit happening in Tasmania. There, the main restriction on there's two restrictions on on pasture cropping is the plants you're planting into and whether they go into a dormancy. Now, I'm certainly aware that it won't work in the pure sense that I developed everywhere in the world. And as you get further in the US, for example, as you get further north, certainly it gets cold, but there's not and I'm talking here about in North Dakota. I was up there a couple of weeks ago doing a talk, and there's not enough. There's not a long enough growing period in some of those areas, so it's not always possible. But certainly cold and dry can work. As you get more in the tropical areas, again, there's not it's a bit like the opposite of it being cold and snow. And areas, there's not a gap either. There's not a dormancy there either in the subtropicals or true tropical areas. I don't know whether that answered the question or not.
Yeah,
I know
David.
in saying that, in Colorado, there's a few people trying, and I guess that's cold and dry in Colorado.
Great.
I know Storm
Thanks.
Casper was trying a bit of pasture cropping in Colorado. Anyone
Okay.
that knows of it.
Let's see, Justin Elway.
Yeah, how you doing?
Hi. Good. How are you?
Good.
Where
I
are
guess
you
this
from?
is from Northwest Montana, so we're
Okay,
that cold climate. You kind of maybe addressed the question already. We've experimented a little bit. We no-till and everything with our practices, and we've done a lot of the multi-species cover cropping, and I've experimented with trying to incorporate warm seasons because we're a cool season dominant, and we have a really prolific spring flush. And Colin, you might have answered it. I think maybe our challenges or why we've failed up to this point is we're coming out of dormancy where I think it makes sense to try to pasture crop, and I just can't get those warm season grasses to compete. And by the time that flush is over, we're hot and dry. So then whatever I put in at that point just fails to get started even, you know. Would you have any advice on that or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are certainly restrictions. So what you can do in a cool season, and climate where it's dominated by cool season, you may have a gap, a niche where you can put some warm season crops into those cool season grasses. They'll almost always be forage crops. It's hard, very difficult to get, you know, something true to a grain, but certainly as a forage to fill stock feed like gaps and animal feed gaps could be quite useful. Doing it the other way around.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of our context. We're a cow-calf operation, and we've got some irrigation, but we've got a big upswing in growth in the spring, and then we level really hard off until the fall again, where we get another spike. But we've got a solid, probably 6 to 8 weeks where it's hot and dry. You know.
Yeah. So if there was any rain there at all to get something to grow, it would work, but it depends on whether you've got the rainfall at that time.
Sure. We have some irrigated, but the problem we have with irrigation is that our cool seasons come out of dormancy and come back into growth. So it's kind of we're playing and trying to figure it out, and we're, you know, trying to do this for the long haul. But I was wondering if maybe you had some good insight, and you've given me a few good nuggets here, so that's been awesome. So appreciate that.
Good.
Good to see you. Thanks. Surya, are you still with us? I'll read it out loud. Do you find that after your holistic controller grazing, that the wildlife like deer and kangaroos move in soon afterward that end up slowing down pasture bounce back, slowing down the rotation?
Okay. Yeah, that can happen. It can be a problem. And I know people that have got or do have that problem with kangaroos here in Australia. I don't have enough numbers of kangaroos here to be too worried about that, but it definitely can be a problem in that wild animals really upsetting the grazing rotation can be a problem, which is quite hard to address.
Okay, thanks. And folks, if somebody needs to leave early, go ahead and put your question in the chat anyway, because the recording will be available. So you'll get your question answered as long as we have time. And thank you for being here if you do need to leave. For some folks, it's now late at night. And for others, it's early in the morning. Donna, hi, Donna. Do you want to ask your question, Donna Isaacs? See if Donna's still here. Donna, we're not hearing you. I see you're still here, but you're muted. You can unmute, otherwise I will read it. It says, are you no-till drilling the multi-species seeds all at the same time? Can you discuss your harvesting process and seed sorting? So we got some.
Hello,
Oh, there we go.
Dee Dee.
Hey, good to see you.
Wait, the volume is not up. Can you hear me?
I can. Yep, I can hear you fine. And Donna, say where you live, because that helps give context.
Okay, this is great. I'm sorry. I'm driving, so I was on mute.
Oh, not a
and I
problem.
tried to figure it out on the phone. So because this would be totally new to me, and the scale is definitely a lot smaller. But I was interested in the harvesting process, and then how do you harvest sort of all the seeds? Because in addition to, let's say, the grains, I would be putting in things like Austrian winter peas and maybe some vetch and maybe some clover. So how do you actually harvest all of that at the same time? And then separate the seeds?
And Donna,
Yeah.
say where you are doing this.
I am in Louisiana, and our main warm season grass is Bahia, and that's what our sheep and goats are on. And I do cover crops, so I do a multi-species no-till drill, a cover crop in there, but I never thought of it as an actual crop. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is biodynamics. So it means if I can grow the grains, I can grow the grains for the pigs and the chickens and truly close my farm down.
Yep.
Great, thanks, Donna.
Okay. A mix of species for pigs and chickens would be a very good diet. Now, harvesting them is not that difficult, but you may need to select species that are that have the same growth pattern, and in other words, have all cool, have all winter or cool season type plants in there. If you start putting an odd warm season one in there, which sometimes you do in a mix, that there's a fair chance that won't ripen at the same time. But I didn't have any problems here. I just let it ripen naturally, and most of the and then talk a bit of a guess at which ones when most of them were all ready to harvest, and it worked out okay. That was not a problem. In your with you, if you're feeding it to pigs and chickens, you probably wouldn't have to clean it at all. I mean, if there's a few like, for example, pea pods and things like that in there,
it would be
I don't think the
perfect.
pigs don't mind.
Okay, so then, and that makes a lot of sense. Do you combine it to get your seeds off? And how much of the actual stock, for want of a better word, of the, say, oats and wheat, would you be taking off before you put the animals in to graze?
Okay. You'd combine it with a normal combine harvester. That's all I use here.
Okay.
And you know, the multi-species crops can be grazed and still get a harvest from them, but you may only get one grazing off them. But I'll just say something now which might interest other people. What I often do here is, because the mixes are dominated by oats, like the highest percentage of grain in there is oats in my mixes.
Okay.
Now, okay, and the rest are like brassicas and peas and things like that. Grazing and that crop can be grazed, and the oats will tolerate 3 or 4 grazings, whereas the brassicas and peas will only tolerate 2, and they won't recover from that. 2, maybe 3 at the most, providing you remove the animals before the cereal is wanting to form grain in it, in the head, or booting,
Right.
that's called. You will end up with a cereal crop that you can harvest. You could remove all the other species from that with animals, and the cereal will recover from the grazing, but the other species generally won't recover from it. So in other words, you can remove others and harvest a grain crop.
Okay, so, or harvest the grain crop first and then remove the others? Does that? I'm not.
Well, the animals, when you're grazing it, well, certainly, you're grazing with pigs and chickens. That's the point I was thinking. I was grazing with sheep, with herbivores. Just backtrack a bit on that. Pigs and chickens are going to be grazing that differently. So that may not work for you.
Right.
It probably work for other people.
Right. I would be pulling off the grains to feed to the chickens and pigs. And then I would be looking to put the goats and the sheep in to graze the stubble, basically.
Okay.
To graze what's left, because the brassicas would be there, some of the clover would be there, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. You certainly can do that. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. I am having problems ordering, but I think it's on my bank side ordering the book, but I will definitely place the order. This is fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm so glad you're able to be here, Donna. I'm loving these questions, and I'm loving what a very practical group we've gathered here. I said that I wasn't sure what percentage of the group would be people who are farming, but it seems we have got a lot of farmers here, which is awesome.
Thank you, Dee Dee, for doing this. This is awesome.
Okay, Kylie, who's in Victoria, Australia. Are you still here?
Hi, Didi. Yes, I'm here.
Hi,
And
Kylie.
thank you for organising this, and thank you, Colin, for your presentation. We are just about to put in a multi-species crop in an old pasture paddock, and we don't have access to a disc seeder. So we have been advised that the best way to make it effective is to spray out what is there first before using a tine seeder to put in the cover crop. And I feel reluctant to do that, but I would really like your advice on how we should best go forward with that.
Okay. Now the tine seeder that I mentioned before would be fine, because in Australia here there's quite a lot of those. And provided it's a zero till, like no till seeder. Now in regard to spraying it, it depends. I'm assuming you're talking about putting a summer multi-species crop in. It's too early at the moment to plant that. It would need to be planted in about in October.
Yes. Sorry, Colin, it's a spring species crop, and it's from down under covers.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Then so yeah, if that'd be fine. If Grant's given you a spring one, so it'll grow early enough and then into the summer. Okay, that'd be fine. Now, in regard to planting, one of the main failures that I see is people that don't do some form of weed control. Like, unfortunately, if you plant into actively growing green plants, it'll almost always fail, because those green actively growing green plants will outcompete those small seedlings. So certainly better to do something regarding weed control. Now, whether that's a herbicide, if you're okay with that, that's probably your only real option if you've already got those, because it's depending on which way you want to go. Ploughing's not really an option, and not everyone likes herbicides either. But on the other hand, you can use more selective herbicides as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kylie. I'm going to suggest that, so we still have a fair number of questions. Let's take a 3-minute stretch break, let Colin rest his voice for a moment, and we'll come back and keep going. So yeah, some people may need to grab some water or let the dog out or something. So just take a quick break. You ready to keep going? Colin, you don't take a break, huh? Oh, let's see. I think I've got you muted here. Sorry about that. There we
Yeah,
go.
how's that?
Okay. Yeah. Um, okay, Ben, are you still here about biological products? Ben's asking which biological products are you using?
Okay, mostly worm leachate, compost teas, that sort of type of biological type products, worm products, and compost extract, that sort of thing.
Okay, great. And Chris says that Gerald has a question about dung beetle populations. Either Chris or Gerald, would you like to unmute and say what the question is?
Well, yeah, I've noticed I hadn't been pouring or drenching my cattle for a while, and I noticed dung beetles came back to work on the manure piles.
When you stopped?
Yeah. When I stopped, but it took a while. I'm going to say 2 years or more. And I've heard this from somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an accurate time frame, but is it? I guess I will take some cattle to the vet and they will automatically pour them during the summer without asking sometimes. So they just pour them if they're doing some other work on them.
Yeah.
Whether it's banding or fixing a sore hoof or whatever, but they will automatically pour them. So if 1 or 10 get poured out of 100, does that still gonna kill all the dung beetle population?
1 out of 100 may not, but one of the problems with drenches, like worm, are the long-acting ones, because they stay in the animal and in the system for a long time. So they seem to be the main problems. So really long-acting drenches. I'd probably try to avoid those. It is a problem. I know, like for sure, almost anyone with cattle that are drenching them regularly certainly don't have many dung beetles.
It's like ivermectin or something like that. And yes, it lasts several weeks in their system.
Yeah, some of those drenches will last 3 months, like 100 days. They're certainly the ones to avoid.
It seems that more and more, like with, dogs and cats and things like that, and I suspect the same is true for farm animals, that more and more they're doing these like once a month or once every, like you said, 3 months or even 6 months, which I always worry about that. If the animal has a reaction to it, you're stuck with it, right? I mean, it's not like you can just not give them the pill the next day because it's in their system for that long. So I find it very dangerous kind of a game that they're playing there, not to mention the side effects.
But
and
it's
certainly from my experience,
go ahead.
Go on. But my experience, cattle don't really get affected with worms that anywhere near as badly as sheep do. And there's a lot of people I know don't drench cattle at all. And so it could be worth trying, just see whether you really do need to drench your cattle. Certainly with sheep in higher rainfall areas, that can be a problem. But with cattle, they don't seem to be, that doesn't seem to be the same problem, but I'd monitor that carefully if you're not going to drench, see how they go.
Well, I hadn't drenched for several years, but like I said, when you go to the vet, they just do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why. I guess everybody else does it.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. The vets seem to do that. I guess all you could tell them was, well, ask them why you're doing it, and tell them the reasons you don't want it done.
I see Justin is saying, are there options to help you bridge the gap that Cydectin is safe for dung beetles, so you can still worm if you need to get you there?
I doubt whether Cydectin is safe for dung beetles. But because Cydectin is a reasonably long-acting wormer as well. But
Mm.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Henry Swayze, about the small rain cycle. Are you still with us? There's Henry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, you have broken in some fairly big chunks of land and improved the pasture dramatically. I'm wondering if you're noticing a difference in your rain cycle, whether you're getting increased rain cycle because of that, and how important you think that is to you.
yeah, I haven't noticed, and it's really difficult to know that rainfall is so variable. So I certainly have noticed that change in rainfall patterns, but that's mostly due to climate, overall climate, climate change, more so than what's happening on the farm and in the smaller cycle. But I think there's no doubt that greening over large areas, as in vegetation, does change rainfall patterns. But I haven't seen anything here. It'd need to be over a large area, I think.
Okay. Let's see. I'm seeing, so there are some comments here. So I'll just read a few of these out. Ludmila was suggesting Ed from Bass Hybrids sells untreated corn. Tim, I think we got your question. Seed harvest and planter cedar. Justin replied to Tim's question saying, Tim, we used the John Deere 1560 drill. It's a single disc opener which cuts right through sod. We've had really good luck. And there's a lot of JD disc drills, but you want the single one, the single disc opener. Ludmila says that Dr. Lundgren, that's John Lundgren at Blue Dasher Farm, tried to establish pasture cropping for a few years, but due to the shorter season, it did not work too well for them there. Did you visit John Lundgren while you were here this time?
No, I've never been to Blue Dasher Farms. No.
Okay.
I would certainly like to. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
I know John.
Yes.
Well.
Yeah, I think he was there at our conference.
He was too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
For those who are not familiar with Dr. John Lundgren or Blue Dasher Farm, or ecdysis is really the more science part of his operation. He had done really groundbreaking work on the effect of neonicotinoids and other pesticides on insect populations, particularly bees, and was getting kind of shut down by his bosses and left and started his own research operation and research farm. So both laboratories and farms, and it's doing an incredible, interesting project of monitoring it of like 1,000 farms to find out what's working and what the effects are on insect populations, but also on things like water infiltration and soil structure and farm profits, etc. So, okay, you still got a little energy, Colin?
Yep.
Okay. You just let us know. We have a lot of good minds here. Surya, if you're still with us, feel free to unmute. But otherwise, do you use liquid inject fertilizer systems when direct seeding, or are you applying your liquid fertilizer like the compost extracts as a foliar?
Okay. Yep, I've used both. I've got liquid injection on my drill on my air seeder, but also as a seed dressing, I have put a liquid on seed dressing. So I've done it both ways there. Okay,
Just replying to Patricia Decker was asking, what's the name of your book again? Custodians of the Grasslands. let's see. Ivan, a few thoughts and comments to share. Are you still here? I saw you'd had your hand up before, so sorry you had to wait for that, but if you want to unmute and say those out loud, otherwise I can read them. Ivan or Yvonne in Maui? Okay, maybe I had to step away. This is about the shallow use of phosphorus fertilizer, 7 kilograms per hectare or 6.4 pounds per acre. It makes sense to me, especially with soil pH levels below 6, which may cause some precipitation to be less available for plants' use. Plus, microbiology activity may not be at its best to reverse it in shorter periods of time, like during a cash crop season. And then secondly, multi-species pastures can also influence polygenic traits in livestock, which are controlled by many genes and influenced by the environment. Some common traits in cattle are calving ease, weaning weight, milking ability, marbling, and tenderness polygenic traits. Cattle have sorry, this is a little, this sounds a little repetitive, but I'll just read it. Cattle have calving ease, weaning weight, milking ability, marbling tenderness, etc. Many genes control polygenic traits, but the environment also influences them. Anything you want to say to that, Colin?
No, I'd say that'd be right. Yeah, certainly you get influenced by environmental issues as well.
Yeah. Suri is asking, would it be possible in Kylie's case, Kylie's the one from Victoria, to graze the paddock down really hard and direct drill the seed 1 week or so before the livestock are moved to have better seed establishment in the living pasture?
Yep, you can. And that's one thing that I didn't really go into very much, that short talk. One of the most important things to do with pasture cropping is to graze it, and graze it hard and short before it is sown. And the reason why we're grazing it hard and short, especially if there's some green plants in there, is to prune the roots. I mean, graze the top and the roots will prune back naturally, which takes competition away from the crop that is being planted. Grazing is a very important component of it. And also adding manure and urine nutrients for the crop is also a very valuable component of that. So yeah, grazing is extremely important before the crop is planted. And it in that sense, although with that question, grazing it hard and then planting now will still probably get competition in the spring and may still affect the growth of that crop. I'd just be a bit careful about how successful that'll be in weed control in that sense, because it's going to grow very fast in the spring soon.
Okay, Surya, if you're still here, did that answer your question? If not, you feel free to unmute. And then the last thing that I see that's sort of a question here from Ludmila is saying, Kylie, could you ban herbicide application to the rows where you would plant using protective cones? Colin, do you want to say anything about that, or I'm not sure I
Banned
understand.
herbicide, I'm assuming banding is the most common thing that's done here in Australia with growing crops. And in other words, fertilizer is put with the seed in almost all of it, which is the most efficient way of putting fertilizer on. Spreading fertilizer after a crop is planted is very, very inefficient, and often is the reason why more fertilizer is used. It should be put with the seed.
So this question is talking about herbicide application.
Is that herbicide or?
Yeah. It says, could you ban herbicide application to the rows where you would plant using protective cones?
Okay, yeah, I misunderstood that. Right, okay. Well, I guess you could. you could do it. There's probably no reason why it wouldn't work. What I have sometimes got people to do, and it is a what is it now? A method anyway, using as in cultivating in strips through a paddock and then wide gaps for organic producers. They don't need to be all that wide, 6 inches wide or something, till you've got a cultivated band that can work for organic producers, and quite a few people are starting to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions in the chat. If there are any burning questions left, I invite folks to unmute or put your virtual hand up. And okay, if we don't have any more questions, I'd love to hear just from a few people kind of what's going on for you right now, having listened to this, and maybe a few words of appreciation of what you're coming away with. Keeping it short, but just to wrap it up. Since if we were in person, we would stand around and talk to Colin and have dinner, and so we don't get to do that. But Justin, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd like to just say thank you. It's been fantastic. Colin, appreciate the opportunity to hear from you. And you've kind of been on my Mount Rushmore of guys in the regen ag space to follow. And it was exciting to be able to hear you talk and ask a question and talk with you there. And I just appreciate all your work and all your contributions to the space here. And Dee Dee, I appreciate you putting this together. And yeah, it's been fantastic. So just wanted to say a big thanks to both of you, and look forward to many more. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we're definitely going to do more of these.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Ralph, did you want to jump in?
I just wanted to say thank you. Yeah, I'm very impressed with how long your family's been farming and what you've been through, and utter destruction. Many people would have just packed up and gone to the city or jumped in the river or something, or thrown themselves off a cliff. I don't know. And that you've come to this point of something that seems so, that is the natural, following nature. And you've learned what you've learned now is becoming popular through being taught how this, what we call the soil food web, the soil sponge, like that. I think it's a really exciting moment in time. Yeah. Important moment.
Yeah.
Very
Thanks, Ralph.
Thank you.
It's been an interesting, exciting journey developing a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been good fun, actually.
Absolutely. All right. Anyone else want to say a personal goodbye before you head off? There are things popping into the chat. Dave? Yeah.
Sure. Colin, thank you so much. I found Colin because an American regenerative farmer named Joel Salatin mentioned him in a conference, and he said, I know you're a modest guy, so don't take this the wrong way, but he said Colin's work is probably going to be remembered as some of the most important agricultural advancements of this century. I based on that recommendation, I bought your book, and the book is fantastic, and it's kind of a bucket list item to see you speak in person, and it's just terrific. I feel like I'm in, I don't know, Geneva in 1910, hearing a young Albert Einstein talk, almost like this is history happening. So I really hope these principles can go out to the whole world. Thank you.
That's marvelous. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Joel visited my farm here, about probably 10 years ago. Yeah, he was going to start, going to be for an hour. I think he was here for about 10 hours, which was, it was great. Yeah, we spent a lot of time trying to solve the problems of the world. I don't know whether we succeeded, but
Yeah, Joel is marvelous. I got to sit down and have lunch with him at a conference where we were at a panel, and what a mind. Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? I saw a heart pop up from Jackie. There's a bunch of things in the chat. All right. Well, we will wrap up there. Thank you, really, Colin. What a wonderful, wonderful thing to have all this time with you. And it's great to see you again and see you looking so well. And looking forward to more collaboration over the coming months now that we've reconnected. My eyes just popped open when I saw that you were you were back in the States, and I was so sorry to have missed you. So I'm glad Lynette connected us again. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And the recording will be available. I will put it on Teachable and also try to send out an email when it's ready, which should be in a few days. And I will include the transcript in the chat because there's a lot in there as well. So, all right. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much, Colin. Enjoy your rest of your day.
Thank you.